Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Department of Energy Python Exchange. My name is Cameron Riddell.
And I'm James Powell.
And we are coming live from the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. James and I are part of the NASA TOPS mission spreading open science training across the US and the globe. Now, this means that we have a very special event for you today, and we're joined by a very special guest panelist. We are joined by Dr. David Nicholson, who is the lead maintainer of VocalPy. David will be speaking about not only VocalPy, but also the development process, the community-based development process, which is something that's hard to find in academia. And he's going to share everything that he has learned while maintaining VocalPy and while actively developing on it. But before I talk any more about David, I wanted to remind everyone of just a few simple points about our exchanges. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and I just want to remind you all that this meeting will be recorded and posted online. So just be very careful in any information that you may reveal in your questions when you pose them. With that being said, I'd like to run you all through today's agenda. First, we are going to introduce our amazing lineup of our host and our guest panelists. Then we'll turn things over to David, who is our guest panelist for today. And as part of that, he will share with us everything that he has prepared in regards to VocalPy and his workflow that he has developed. Finally, we'll do a live Q&A where, if you're in the audience, this will be your chance to ask any questions and spark some fantastic discussion, not just with David, but with our host panelists as well. With all of that being said, let's jump right into our introductions, our amazing lineup of our host and guest panelists. For our introductions, I would love to have each of our panelists answer two simple questions. Where do you work, or what do you do, in other words? And what types of questions would you love to address today? And so I'll start us off. Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Riddell. I work at Don't Use This Code, and while I'm not affiliated with a national lab, I would absolutely love to talk to you about anything Python or its scientific stack. I love answering questions on those. I love answering questions on Stack Overflow, so please hit us with your best Python questions. Next up,
Cameron, by the way, is also PI on a very important NASA TOPS grant to bring open science practices to you. This is why he's in Florida this week.
Thank you, James. Always keeping me humble. I'm also joined by James Powell, also at Don't Use This Code. James, what types of questions would you love to hear today?
So I'm helping Cameron on this grant to bring open science practices to people not only within the Department of Energy, but throughout scientific research sites. If you are interested in what open science means for you, or how it is that you can get your user scientists at your user facilities to actually follow open scientific practices like make your work publishable, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible, let's talk.
Next up, we are also joined by Daniel Allen. Dan, I know that you work at BNL, but can you share with us what is it that you consider yourself an expert in, or what questions would you love to help us answer today?
Sure. I usually say that I'm happy to answer questions about building informal ground-up collaborations across the labs. But today I'm also in the mood to answer any questions about obscure IPython shortcuts or tricks. That's on my mind today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dan. We're also joined by Vika Kopp. And Vika, I see that you're at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Could you share with us a little bit about what it is that you do and what you consider yourself an expert in?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Wiebke, and I'm a computational research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab at the Advanced Light Source. And I consider myself an expert in data visualization. And I'm especially interested, both topic-wise and question-wise, on talking about doing live data analysis and visualization while either an experiment is running or a simulation is running.
Luca, I love to hear that you are passionate about data visualization. I am as well. And I think some of the difficulties that you encounter when not just doing live processing, but live processing visualization of likely what you're dealing with are very large data sets. So I think that's very interesting. I'm so happy to have you join us today. We are also joined by our guest panelist. This is Dr. David Nicholson. Now, David, I know that you are the lead maintainer of VocalPy. Could you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do with VocalPy and what it is that you consider yourself an expert in?
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. I'd love to tell you about VocalPy. I'm going to talk all about that in the talk. I think most relevant for you and James, I'm originally from Florida. I'm a Florida boy, so I consider myself an expert in dealing with Florida men. I'm also very proud that you're there at Cape Canaveral for TOPS. So, if you need to know how to deal with a gator, I'm happy to answer any questions about that, and then I'll talk more about VocalPy during the main talk.
Excellent. Well, David, I will give you a call if I see a gator. I think I've only seen one, and it was outside the car window. It was a safe distance away, but it was also 3 feet or so I wasn't too terrified. But if I see a bigger one...
Yeah, just let me know.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that wraps up our introductions for today. And David, I want to give you the reins now because I would love to hear about what you prepared for us with VocalPy.
So yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about VocalPy as a case study of domain-driven design in scientific Python, and hoping to really start some discussion and get some feedback from you all. Really glad to be here with this audience. Let me start out by acknowledging my principal collaborator, Dr. Yarden Cohen, who is a neuroscientist and the head of a lab at the Weizmann Institute. I'm just going to start a timer to make sure I keep myself on time. And you can find him at all of these places. A little bit more about me. So I have a day job, but I'm just here talking about this work that I do in my ever-diminishing free time. So opinions are mine and not those of my employer. My background is I have a PhD in neuroscience and animal behavior, and then I did a postdoc in a related field, cognitive science. And maybe more relevant for this audience, I've been involved with SciPy since the conference since 2015, and I've been a chair since 2020. Call for proposals is still open, March 5th. Get yours in now. We'll be in Tacoma, Washington this year. I also have been active in PyOpenSci since 2018. I did a stint as editor-in-chief, a great organization. I'll say a little bit more about them later. And also involved in USRSE, the Research Software Engineer Association, which has a very active national labs group. So if you're not already participating there, it might be a great group for you to find out about. And so now I'm going to tell you about why there should be a VocalPy. What does that mean? And I'm going to recycle this talk I just gave at PyData Global. So I'll try to give you the high gloss version because the detailed version is online. And then since this is a little bit more of an informal session, I will try to do a live demo instead of showing you like static slides of code. And then I'll sort of really quick show you some results to show you how we're actually using the package, where we're going with development. I'll say something quickly about a roadmap, but then finally get to the end where I talk about domain-driven design and how that might interact with scientific Python, because I really hope we can talk about that. So what is VocalPy? A core package for acoustic communication research in Python. And when I say core package, I mean something like AstroPy, where you have this core package in a system that's developed by a community of, in this case, astrophysicists. Our community is, or astronomers, that broad domain. Our domain is people who study acoustic communication in animals. So all animals communicate in some way with sound, like I'm showing you in this cladogram here. And we also know that the brain areas that are responsible for learning, and in some animals producing, and in some animals learning sound, are all related, like across all vertebrates, basically. So this and many other pieces of evidence sort of suggest that by studying how animals communicate with sound, we can really get at what makes us human. So there's not many behaviors left at this point that we think are unique to humans. One of them is what I'm doing right now, speaking a language. But like I just told you, all animals communicate in some way with sound. And there's a lot of parallels, right? So birds many species of songbird learn their song and that has many parallels to how we learn to speak. Similar things are true for the signature whistles of dolphins. So basically, by studying how animals communicate with sound, we can sort of answer this question of how did speech evolve, right? Like, why are we the only animals that has this ability of language? And we can better understand how other animals learn their vocalizations and communicate with each other. And other people have proposed that answering these kinds of big questions really requires interdisciplinary work. You need these diverse expertises working together. This has been called, big team science. And it means you're going to have big data then, so you want to automate your analyses, which means you'll need cutting-edge computational methods, such as deep learning, which are eating the lunch of methods in every field, including this one, right? So there's reviews here, and I can share these slides if you want to dig into these papers. At the bottom here, these last two talking about specifically for animal communication and bioacoustics more generally, how is deep learning revolutionizing how we analyze our data and model behavior. So I might have convinced you with all that acoustic communication is a really interesting field to study, but you might still feel like, do we really need a core package? Like, isn't this just it's like a niche of animal behavior? And to sort of make my case, I'll point to two recent packages, Paikanto from Nilo Merino Recalde and Ko from Fukuzawa. And those are both sort of like in the same vein. Ko is actually like a full-fledged application with a Python backend. And furthermore, if you go to this repository from Tessa Reinhardt, she's a graduate student in the Kitsis lab. She has this listing of how there's hundreds of different libraries for people studying not just animal communication, but bioacoustics more broadly. And you'll see that and maybe this sounds familiar to your field, right? There's many different formats for audio, for annotating audio, which you do with a GUI, like I'll show you, for array data, sounds familiar, right? So it really makes it feel like it would be really nice if there was just a core package that sort of handled this functionality for working with all these different data formats in particular. And we found, like I'm going to sort of tell you in this case study, like we ended up feeling like we needed to develop this for the work that we're doing. Our goal is to have a library that's sort of general enough that for those of us that are scientists, coders, we can be working in this interactive mode and figuring out what is our analysis, but then robust enough at the same time that we can hand that to a research software engineer that then makes it sort of the back end of an application and something like a GUI. Can we deploy this and scale it up, right? And we really want to enable better collaboration between scientists, research software engineers, and then all the rest of us that are somewhere in between those two ends of the spectrum. And the features we're developing that make this possible in VocalPy are domain-specific data types. This gets at this idea of like domain-driven design, I'm going to come back to, that are made so that we can work with this wide array of formats I told you about. When we have classes for common steps and workflows, so you're often segmenting audio or computing spectrograms or extracting acoustic features, we have classes that represent those steps so you can write out your pipelines in a readable way. And there are also these classes, these data types, they're designed for reproducibility where you sort of capture the parameters you use automatically and you're able to save them as metadata. And again, like the sort of vision here is that you would let this scientist coder, I'll be able to do my work interactively and then for free sort of build a data set at the end and then pass that along as a database without me needing to be like a SQL wizard. That kind of flexibility, which maybe sounds too good to be true, but we're working on it. And a lot of it is a lot easier because of the scientific Python stack. Thank you, NumFocus, for supporting all of this. And now I'm going to talk about a case study, TweetyNet, to sort of motivate, like, again, why we felt like we needed to develop this. So TweetyNet's a neural network model. It automates annotation of animal sounds and does this in a way that avoids issues with segmenting audio. The gory details are in this eLife paper. But basically, the way this neural network model works is it takes in a window from a spectrogram, and then for every time bin in that spectrogram, every column, it predicts a label. And then we can post-process that and get back the annotations that we want, which are usually a segment with a start and an end time and some human annotated label. So this is what this looks like in a GUI, right? Where you would have the spectrogram at the top. And in this case, I'm showing you a Bengalese finch song with the frequencies on the y-axis and then time on the x-axis. And then you have a second panel, usually, if you're segmenting, where you take the energy, some people call this the amplitude, you set a threshold on it, and all the continuous periods above that threshold, you call your segments, and then a human expert will annotate those segments as appropriate for whatever analysis they're trying to do, for whatever model of behavior they want to build. So in this case, in Bengalese finches, each individual has their own unique song, so we assign some arbitrary set of labels to the syllables, as we call them, in that song. And then we can build models of the syntax, like I'll show you in a second. But sort of the issue here is that segmenting audio across species doesn't work well with the sort of off-the-shelf signal processing algorithms like the one I just described to you at a high level. So here is this example from my collaborator, Yarden Cohen, of Canary Song. This is sort of like a best case scenario where this is an individual that's acoustically isolated. There's no background noise. And what happens if you use that same sort of thresholding-based approach is that you can find good parameters for one syllable, but it will over-segment another and then under-segment yet another. And so this is really a case where neural network models are actually useful, as I'll show you when we get to some results. But, the point here is that we made this model, we shared the paper, we tried to make the code as easy to use, as I'll tell you, and people are using it. I don't have time to go into the details of these models of acoustic behavior, but like I said, they're sort of models of the syntax of Canary or Bengalese finch song, models of motor learning or of dialects in different populations of songbirds, right? So this works, but what I want to tell you is that we found that it still wasn't easy enough for people to use our code. And this is a story that even if you're not in this domain, I guess might sound familiar to you, right? Where our model, TweetingNet, started life as a single Jupyter notebook written in TensorFlow. And then we wanted to be good computational scientists, so we developed this whole neural network framework we just presented at SciPy. And then we rapidly found that there are all these annotation formats, so we needed to be able to work with that. So again, trying to do things in a good open science way, we made a library that we submitted to bioacoustics, and then it went to JOS just for working with annotation formats. I gave a talk on this at PyCon if you want to hear a little bit more about the PyOpenSci process. And then again, like we're trying to do everything the right way. We share a repository with the paper that just is for replicating the experiments. So we made all these libraries so that we could run experiments. Then we shared a separate project that replicates the experiments. And what we found was people would say, oh, I want to be able to visualize the outputs of the network with a spectrogram. And we would say, it's there in the code. We shared it with you. Right, but they didn't find it because the code was hard to read. And this is hard to convey. Here I'm showing you the left panel of VS Code where you see the many files that are in this project that we shared, right? And even when we did point them to it, it was too hard for them to adapt to their data. And so, again, coming back to there's all of these different formats for audio, array data, annotations. This is sort of the thing that makes it hard to have this code be reusable. And coming up a level, in this domain in particular, there's sort of two different ways of working. Because we are visual animals, and I can't analyze birdsong by listening to it, it's going by too fast. We work in a GUI, right? But as we know, there's issues with GUI. Their GUIs are usually not designed to capture the parameters or steps in analysis automatically. There's other issues with them. It's a really hard design problem, so I'm not attacking anyone who's working on a GUI, but I think this will sound familiar to you if you've ever worked on a GUI as well. There's a reason we write scripts instead of using Excel, for example. So of course, in reaction to this, people have started to write scripts and develop these libraries that are more reusable. But because of the many different data formats I just told you about, our scripts end up really working with these low-level details. Like you spend a lot of time doing sort of data cleaning and validation and setup. And then you end up with scripts that are tightly coupled to these formats, which means that they're harder to read, they're harder for other groups to reuse, and by extension, libraries are harder for users to configure because you have this cognitive load of thinking about all of these data formats. And again, like it's hard to convey this in a talk. This is from a proceedings paper, right, where I sort of give this toy example of, I'm writing the script, I'm doing the analysis, I'm figuring it out in my Jupyter notebook. I'm trying to be a good scientist. I was told that I should write helper functions. So I do that. And then, what happens is I hide some parameter that's really important in this as a default in this function. And I'm not like sort of explicitly declaring it. And then another issue here is that data types are missing for our field, and we end up with a proliferation of variables, right? So to make this more concrete, when I'm working with sound, I need the sampling rate. Like if I'm going to call a SciPy signal spectrogram, I have to tell it the sampling rate. So that's already two variables related to this one piece of data that I care about. Then I'm going to get back the spectrogram, and because I'm doing bioacoustics, I often want to talk about a range of frequencies and a certain time. So now I need not just the matrix that is the spectrogram, but also the vector of frequencies and the vectors of times that go with the spectrogram, right? So I have this abundance of variables, and now I'm passing them around to all of my helper functions, which I was told would make my code good, right? So just adding some domain-specific data types, like I show, can help make this less verbose, but there's other things that we're trying to do to get at these issues. And so to show you that, I'm going to switch over and try to do a demo. So I'm going to try to do this in 2.5 minutes, not 15. So maybe I should rename our quick start. But as a good computational scientist, I'm going to restart and then manually run all. So I'm going to import VocalPy as Voc. You're not a real library until you arbitrarily give yourself an alias, right? So I'm going to use this example function to get back this domain-specific data type of a sound, and that's from the built-in example. So I can list those. We're using Pooch, great package. Thank you to the developers. For some of the larger data sets that we have, like this BF song repo, this is this Bengalese Finch song repository that I just jumped over to here. And what we got back from calling that example function is a list of sounds. So let's inspect one of those. And we can see that it is an instance of a class that has these attributes, the data, which is a numpy array, the sample rate, right? So now the sample rate, this is encapsulated with the data. So I don't have to carry them around as two variables anymore. And then I also have the path that I loaded it from. Right, so I'm just showing you those here. The data is the numpy array. It has dimensions of channels and then samples that we try to be consistent with that dimension order when we go to spectrograms, for example. Just showing you have the sample rate there, encapsulating the data, and then finally the path. We also have some derived properties, which we get for free, and it's not really expensive to compute them. So, and you often want to know these things. What is the number of channels? There's one, there's roughly 290,000 samples. And using the sample rate and the number of samples, you can get the duration, which is, more intuitive, because I usually think in seconds and not samples, unless I'm really into digital signal processing. So if you were working with examples, right, you'd have your own data directory, and we have a helper function that just gives you back all of the wave files, for example, that you would then turn into instances of sound with a list comprehension. So now we have this list of sounds, what are we going to do with them? We're going to make spectrograms, compute those spectrograms, and for that, we're going to use this class, spectrogram maker. Very wordy class name. I hope that the English language hurries up and invents a verb for spectrogramming. The important thing here is that we're going to explicitly declare the parameters that we're using with a callback function. In this case, we're using this convenience function built into VocalPy, which is called spectrogram. But we're going to pass in those parameters along with the callback. And then, as you might guess, when we call spect maker make on this instance of the spectrogram maker class, we're going to get back a bunch of spectrograms. And under the hood, we're using Dask to trivially parallelize this. And so now we have a list of spectrograms. Looks very similar to our sound in the sense that we have a class instance with these attributes with data, the frequencies, and the times, which are those two vectors, numpy arrays that we need. But we want to be able to visualize this, right? I told you that we're visual animals. We need to see this data to be able to analyze it. So let's do that. And we can see now, yes, we're dealing with again, a spectrogram of a Bengalese finch song. And we're able to put some limits on the times and the frequencies. And I didn't have to pass around 3 arrays to do that, right? So hopefully I've made the script already a little more concise. And again, just emphasizing, if we want to go back down to numpy arrays, it's right there. It's only one attribute away. And we can get all of those properties of numpy arrays that we know and love. Notice we're keeping the time as the last dimension, so we're consistent across the different functions we call. And just showing you again that we have the expected frequencies and times that we need for those analyses we want to do in bioacoustics. And because writing spectrograms can be really computationally expensive, like if you have high sampling rate for mouse ultrasonic vocalizations that are very high frequency, we give you the ability to write these to just NPZ files. And then we can confirm that we get the same thing back. Yes, when we run an equality check here, it's the same thing loaded, right? And then last but not least, one more domain-specific data type is the annotation. So we're going to get some CSV paths from the same example data set. And then we're going to load these into this annotation data type. And again, it has the data attribute, and it has some other attributes that we need to work with it. And finally, we can actually plot the annotations along with the spectrogram itself, right? So this is just about like making it so that you can do these sort of interactive analyses in the notebook and cut down on the number of variables that you're working with and have these classes to represent the workflow. So I hope that sort of like gave you the flavor of what working with VocalPy would be like. Thank you for bearing with me with my very first live demo. I'd like a small round of applause. Just kidding. Save that for the end. Thank you, Daniel. And let me go back to the slides now. I'm going to go into results really quick and then jump into the domain-driven design part. I think I'll still make it out under 30 minutes if you all will bear with me.
I really enjoyed the adrenaline rush of watching someone live execute a notebook on screen, especially if they forget to restart before and clear.
Right.
But, yeah.
I mean, what's really crucial is that I switched back to the main branch before I ran the notebook, which,
Yeah. Jay and I is here. He did the talk off the main branch at SciPy last year, and it worked. Faith in his development processes.
So getting back into the flow, so I showed you sort of what VocalPy is like. You might be like, sounds great, but are you actually using it for anything? We are, we're testing it out. We just presented at the Society for Neuroscience meeting in fall. I'm not going to go into the details of how these models work, but we're basically comparing families of neural network models for segmenting audio There's recurrent networks like TweetyNet, and then there's another model which is also used for time series prediction, but it uses a convolution operation. So that's all you need to know for now. What I want you to see here is, here we're using Voc to compare these neural network models. In this group bar plot, the two groups on the left and in the middle, these are the convolutional models. And then the TweetyNet models on the right, and we see that window size matters. So the red bar all the way to the right in each of these groups is the biggest window with the cleanup step that's applied after, and you see that has the lowest character error rate. So where VocalPy comes in is that we have these segmentation metrics, and we're able to apply these to the segments that we get out from these models. And what we're looking at is the boundary, the time that it occurs. And we sort of have a tolerance around that in some number of milliseconds. And we have a nice vectorized way of computing these sort of information retrieval metrics with that tolerance built into VocalPy. And so using that, we're able to show basically a similar result holds for the segmentation itself, for the time, that if you make the window bigger, you get better performance. And, intuitively, this is just the model having more context and being able to learn from that. So looking again at the red bar all the way on the right, the precision is the highest. And we're showing this using these metrics built into VocalPy. We also showed that these convolutional models tend to over-segment. And again, like really glossing over the details, we showed some methods for how to compensate for that by changing the loss function. But again, like being able to use these metrics built into VocalPy, and work in progress I have now is about sort of creating a class to represent these segments to make them easier to work with, because you get a similar thing happening here where you have the onsets and the offsets of these segments come back as numpy arrays, and it gets really verbose. So developing that now, wanted to demo it, but it turns out that you find a bunch of issues with existing algorithms when you try to do that. So that's why it's fun to write code. Okay, other work in progress. A big question in the field is how we measure similarity in bird songs. What's the similarity of a song between, for example, a tutor and a juvenile that learns from that tutor? There's this sort of seminal paper in the field that proposed a method that uses sort of engineered, parametrically defined acoustic features such as pitch and duration to do that. And there's been multiple attempts or multiple implementations of it in Python. These are two really good examples on the bottom here that took what was in Sound Analysis Pro, which is the original package that sort of made this analysis available, and they've implemented in Python. And I basically adapted those and have built them into VocalPy. We have in this feature extraction module, and sort of the next step that we've taken with this is we are using Xarray like many other fields, because we're realizing, yes, it's really useful to be able to say, this is not just a numpy array, this is the actual dimension that we have that we call amplitude. And we have some time coordinate that lets us say very easily, I want to get the amplitude between 4 seconds and 5.27 seconds, right? So, we're trying to move towards having a research software ecosystem with VocalPy in the middle. We have a lot of contributors, which has been great. Thanks to everybody that's contributed so far. We have a forum, and we'd love to, if nothing else, just drop by and give us a drive-by star so you can say it sounds cool. Okay. In the last minute, let's talk about domain-driven design in scientific Python. I thought about calling it versus scientific Python. Let's see. We're in the spicy takes part of the talk right now. Okay, what is domain-driven design? So this is a book from Eric Evans, 2003. This is sort of like the era of agile development with enterprise Java. And so it's sort of written in a sense in reaction to some of that, in reaction to like waterfall development, where we're going to figure out all of our requirements ahead of time and then design according to those requirements, because it turns out that doesn't work, as you might have noticed. But all of us, of course, have thought like, yeah, I'm developing for my domain, so I'm going to think about that and try to make it natural. This post from Martin Fowler, I think, sums up sort of the key ideas that Eric Evans contributed. One of them is this idea of ubiquitous language. So, like in the software itself, what are sort of like the key verbs and nouns, and figure those out, and then use them in the software, right? Like having data containers that are named for things in your domain, having classes, in this case, they're very object oriented. So have a class that is representing some service in his terminology that would operate on your data containers. And then the other big idea is developing a domain model, not just on paper, but in the software, right? So like write your proof of concept and then keep iterating on that over and over. And all of your development should be driven by that. Like keep going back to that and figure out, like, is this capturing this sort of like essence of my domain? And if you, like me, read this book and become a convert and start rambling to someone about it, especially a wizened software developer, they'll be like, yeah, we all do that. That's like common sense. But if that's true, like show me in scientific libraries, like where is this domain model written down? How was it iterated on? Who had input? Like, I really get excited by this idea. Read the first chapter if you read nothing else. And he talks about, talking with domain experts and how they iterate on this model. I would just like to see a lot more of that. Maybe it's happening and I'm just not aware of it. Please tell me. I'd love to hear that. But that sort of really, struck me when I started writing VocalPy. And I'm going to sort of contrast that a little bit. This is where it starts to get spicy. I'm going to talk about the Zen of Scientific Python. I've seen multiple attempts to propose the Zen of Scientific Python. This is from Gael Veriquois' talk at SciPy 2017. So first of all, no matter how much Python I learn, I will always be 10 years roughly behind Gael. and I also basically broadly agree with everything he says here. This is, it's a really good talk. You should watch it. But I'm going to point out two of these rules that he says and how it might seem like VocalPy is like breaking those rules, but then say, maybe it's not, or maybe we can get the best of both worlds. So one rule is functions are easier to understand than classes, right? And this is because classes can have hidden states, and sort of like the paradigmatic example of this is a GUI where you have something like signals and slots and you interact with the widget and then that triggers this callback. And there's all this stuff going on that can be really hard to reason about when you come to a code base. Hello, TK Enter. And he says, functions have a universal interface. There's one way in and one way out. Classes don't necessarily have that. And these classes, if you wrap up a bunch of domain-specific logic in them, travel poorly between libraries, right? There's this set of concepts that's baked into them. And then rule number 2, he talks about using common data containers, right? So numpy arrays, pandas data frames, X-array data sets, if you want to be exotic, right? And he says that common data containers make the ecosystem stronger. And he gives this example of like, what if I had a function that took this Earth factory model? What is that, right? Couldn't we just have this be a dictionary if it's, if it's just mapping keys that are parameters of a model to some outputs? Do we really need some class that's hard to understand, like where it comes from? And he says, if a library defines its own data containers, there's a big cost to switching to this library. And so if I steelman these two rules, if you, like me, are someone who enjoys programming because it's a world where you can figure out why things are wrong and you can fix them, right? Then you might really feel like, oh, the rules should be that all scientific Python libraries should be purely functional, and those functions should only accept numpy arrays and pandas data frames. And so I broke those rules, right? I classed. I made a spectrogram maker that is a class, not a function, and it has methods. And notice here, I iterated on my model. These used to be called audio. It's now sound. That's just by the way. then next in this talk, right after this, talking about the Zen of Scientific Python, Gael talks about the scikit-learn API, which, if I understand it correctly, is based around a class, which has methods, exactly 3. You're allowed to have 3, right? And so he's not disagreeing with himself, right? Another way maybe to phrase this is that what we want to do is avoid classes with hidden state and multitudes of methods at all costs. And what we want to do is avoid complex class hierarchies at all costs. And again, like, you might feel like, yeah, we all know this. We've all thought about this. If you've dealt with a very heavily object-oriented code base. But again, I think it is worth revisiting this idea, and sort of, maybe a way to think about it is, I can have one class with a couple of methods. I can do one level of subclassing. If I go beyond that, I start to worry. And coming back to this idea of common data containers, again, I broke the rules. I made this spectrogram class, and now it's expensive to switch to my library. But, I think we can get the best of both worlds if we just have those common data containers as attributes, right? So you're encapsulating those common data containers in some domain-specific type. And this lets you sort of still write functions that a domain expert can reason about, like a sound is going in, a spectrogram is coming out. And then when you need them, they're right there. I do have to write like a period for attribute access, and then some name like data or df or values if you want to be very idiomatic and pandas like, but they are there. So I think there can be a trade-off where you don't pay too much of a cost to have your own data container. So yeah, just wanted to bring those things up and spur some more discussion. Let's talk about those things now. Here's all the links. You can find me there. I hope that wasn't too spicy. Again, I'm trying to be as humble as possible. I know like probably everyone else is more of an expert than me here, but just some thoughts I had while developing this code. So thanks for hearing me out.
That was great, David. I've been nominated to take over for Cameron and James and see us out as they had business at NASA. I don't know if they sat on the public side of the wall. I brought my own spicy takes.
Nice.
I really enjoyed yours. I think I'll lead off with a question while maybe our audience can throw some questions in the Q&A. So I really liked all of that. I think we have a website that we give our facility users and our postdocs as a kind of general design principles for SciPy, aimed at somebody who's not going to make their career around programming, but is just trying to do a decent job while their primary job is research. And we used to say, use functions, use dictionaries, stop it with custom objects everywhere, because a pattern that we saw a lot that was very hard to untangle was a class with methods that would change state, and you had to know to call the analyze function after the load function, but before the plot function, right? Yeah. And it was a mess. And an insight that Henry Schreiner contributed to a better version of this guide is classes are fine. It's hidden state that's bad. So instead of one object with many methods, it's many objects that can have one method. Like you can have the data class with the process method, but that returns a new object. It doesn't change your original object. And that kind of gets you out of that hole. What I wanted to press you on is, how do you know when you need to escalate from something like a data class or a custom class from a dictionary? Because everybody loves dictionaries and they're just there.
Yeah. It's true. Look, for me, the question is, how much do I have to work on my muscle memory to where I can find the quotes key so I can write the key for the dictionary?
I think that's really it. Yeah.
Right. If I write a data class or a custom class, I get that attribute access, and that makes things a little easier. But yeah. I definitely I think I agree with you on the gut level, but is the best argument for switching that dot is easier than
square bracket quote, especially for beginners, or is this something stronger than that?
Yeah. No,
that's a good argument, maybe, but
it's a good question. Like if I'm programming, if I'm coding, if I'm doing analysis, if I'm doing library design, at what point is it worth it to have this custom class? I think mostly for analysis, you probably don't need it. I do find data classes useful a lot of times, especially if it's like there's this function with parameters and I want to represent like, here's the 5 ways that other people have used this sort of method with 5 sets of parameters. So you have a data class that's like, here's the parameters to this function, and here's these 5 papers that used this same function that are like instances of that data class at a module level. Does that that's hard to describe verbally, but something like that, where I just want to like capture it and it starts to it feels more readable as a data class. I'm happy
I've also seen, I don't see any open questions coming in. So ask your questions, folks, unless you want to hear us keep talking indefinitely.
Right.
Vivka, you have one?
I think I have an opinion on the class versus dictionary discussion.
Good. Here, have some
and I think, yeah, spicy take. I think that creating a class, if you're as a software developer providing a class to your user, you are communicating with that you may have some expectations of what are sort of the minimum set of things that should be provided. Whereas a dictionary, you can put anything in the dictionary. And of course, you can write a function that checks what's contained in the dictionary and so on. But with a class, you're providing some more, maybe not fully strict structure, but you're communicating with that you're expecting a certain structure. And so that's where I see some of the trade-off. And then also just having an initialization function that can check or whether your parameters are sensible and things like that.
That makes a lot of sense.
No, that totally
I think I saw a David Beasley tweet that was like, a dictionary is a working space and a class is an edifice, like, something you built with purpose. Sorry, David, what were you saying?
No, I love that quote. I stole the David Beasley joke, which was Greg Wilson has this book, Data Science for JavaScript, and David Beasley said it should be Data Science versus JavaScript. So that's where my domain.
Yeah,
he has good insights on these things. I totally hear what you're saying, that like a dictionary, anything can be in there, and a class, it's sort of declaring, I expect one of these, and you can do it's very quicker. It's very quick to do like is instance of class compared to check everything in the dictionary. But it is an edifice, which means now you as the software designer have to like do all these tests to make sure your edifice doesn't fall over.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. I had one more unrelated question. You mentioned, I don't know if you used the word, but you were talking about something I would call workflow management, capturing steps and reproducibility. And we've definitely seen, I think maybe especially in the lab complex, a tendency for just everything to grow a workflow manager. That there's somebody who funds NSF grants, put together, funds various research grants. I'm blanking on the name. Might have been Dan Katz, put together a list of 50 workflow managers paid for by the DOE.
Right. Yes.
So what happens to this? One theory is that it optimizes really well to somebody's particular research problem, but then fails to generalize, except maybe when it doesn't in some cases. What did you see as you surveyed these many small projects that didn't have a core package? What were people trying to do? Did it work?
Right. So what I see, and I think that this is, so what I see is people that aren't using workflow tools. And I think it's a good point I think it's good that you bring it up. Like what I see is a lot of Jupyter notebooks.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually love that. Like, there's this, I'm looking at now a paper from Nick Georgine and his collaborators where they're looking at mouse ultrasonic vocalizations and other sounds that these mice make. And they just provide like a set of Jupyter notebooks. And in some way, it feels like more clear than all the code we wrote for the TweetingNet paper. I'm like, oh, it should just have been declarative Jupyter notebooks. Like, it is very verbose, so it gives me a roadmap. Like, I'm just going to make this so I can rewrite it and have it be more succinct. But I'm thinking about like, should I just integrate with an existing, like SnakeMake to me seems like an existing workflow manager. So how do I like not reinvent the wheel, right? And avoid doing exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, there's just another workflow tool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say. All right. Well, no, unless I'm using this wrong, I see no other open questions from the gang. So I think it's my job to call here. I wanted to end by saying I thought the plots were all really cool. What a nice field that you get to look at such lovely plots all the time.
Yes. Very there was a perk. And I should have put some sound in. I didn't want to run with the there's some AV risk that you run there, but we also get to just listen to cool animal sounds all day, so doesn't sound as cool as a black hole, maybe.
Great. Well, thank you to David, especially as our guest panelist for that presentation and discussion. Thanks to Vibeke for joining us for what I think was the first time as a host panelist. It's great to have you.
It was the first time. Yeah.
And thanks everyone for coming. Keep an eye on the website, which is meetup.doepie.org, meetup, one word, .doepie.org for the announcement of next month's speaker. We'll see you around soon.
Thanks all.